Hey folks, I see we have a growing list of attendees here, so glad to see everybody getting signed in and getting settled. We will give everybody 1 or 2 minutes to get into the webinar here, and then we'll get started. All right. Well, really glad to have a great group here. Thank you for joining. If someone you know is trying to get in, make sure that they go to the Eventbrite page or the Zoom registration page. Those are linked to each other, and sign up with your email that you're going to use as a Zoom registrant. That sometimes can help with the process. We're really lucky to have Spencer Ferguson and Vincent Voci. Am I saying that right? Vincent Voci on the call here. They're both very busy, and we're grateful to have their time today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share of our billboard there, and I want to share a little bit about both of these two thought leaders in the cyberspace, and then we will jump into questions. As we do that, I have a list of questions that I want to ask, but I would love to hear from our participants today. So if you have questions, there is a button called Q&A right at the bottom. Click that, type your question, and we'll try to squeeze them in during this call today. We will end at about 10 minutes prior to 11 Mountain Time. And so 10 minutes before the hour, we'll wrap up, and I'll jump into our bios here. So first, Spencer Ferguson. So he is the CEO and founder of Wasatch IT, which is the managed service provider for over 500 organizations and is Utah's largest locally owned outsourced IT firm. Spencer was named to Utah Business Magazine's 40 Under 40 at the age of 29. He's a member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Small Business Council, which is how we put together this call today through the U.S. Chamber. He's a board member of the Alta Club in Salt Lake City, Chamber West, and president-elect of the Salt Lake Rotary Club, so very involved here in the Utah community. Wasatch IT has won numerous accolades throughout its history, including four consecutive Inc. 5000 and Utah 100 awards. Microsoft Partner of the Year, and is regularly recognized as one of Utah's top workplaces and best places to work. So thank you, Spencer, for joining us today. Vince Voci is a vice president of cyber policy and operations in the cyberspace and national security division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in DC. He is a cyber and national security policy veteran who leads engagements with members between Capitol Hill, federal civilian executive branch agencies, the Department of Defense, law enforcement, and international partners and allies. At the Chamber of Commerce, Voci leads national and international discussion and engagement on high-profile security policy issues influencing legislation, regulation, and policy in domestic and international markets. Voci leads several of the Chamber's national security programs, including Project Security, the Chamber's International Cyber Policy Working Group, the Cyber Leadership Council, 5G Security Council, and the Space Industry Council. All really cool things that he's working on there, providing the Chamber members with deep policy expertise. UAT is also a Chamber member, like Wasatch IT. So providing us with that expertise, advocacy, and business intelligence across a variety of national and economic security issues. Prior, he worked for Senators Scott Brown and George Allen, and he's a graduate of American University in DC with a BA in political science. Voci is a native of Cape Cod, and he and his wife reside in Washington, DC. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. And we are lucky to be discussing this really important topic that is really critical for our members at the Utah Aerospace and Defense Association. For those who are joining an association event for the first time, the Utah Aerospace and Defense Association convenes, advocates, and promotes the aerospace, defense, and cybersecurity companies here in the state of Utah. We have a rich history here in these sectors, and it's growing very, very quickly. And so I see many of you on the call today that work in those sectors and that support our growth in the state of Utah. And cyber is such a critical, important part of our growth in our future here in the state of Utah. So my first question is for Vince. This meeting is called the White House Cybersecurity Webinar, and that's because the Biden-Harris administration released a National Cybersecurity Strategy. Can you tell us what that is and what it would mean for our industry here in Utah?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Robert, and thanks to the entire Utah team for convening today's webinar. And good to be back with you and Spencer and the entire community to talk a little bit about cyber today. So yes, the Biden-Harris administration has released its first national cyber strategy. It is a reflection of the administration's core cybersecurity priorities and sets forth a policy direction over the next 2 years or so. It also, I think, is a reflection of kind of some of the national circumstances upon which they had entered the administration. January of 21, we have an ongoing exploit of the SolarWinds Orion software that was a very complex supply chain attack on a particular software vendor, impacting several, about 100 or so public and private entities. Add to that a series of high-profile and cascading ransomware incidents impacting national critical functions and the distribution of certain critical services and essential services. And I think that was the part of the perspective of the Biden administration as they were thinking through how he and the core of the administration would tackle these issues. So one, and first and foremost, it puts forward a perspective that we aren't yet as a society doing enough to reduce cyber risk for critical infrastructure. So there's a very significant focus and attention to rebalancing roles and priorities for those that manage outside levels of risk relative to the rest of the economy. Second, it talks a lot about risk and deterrence operations, things like the Hive takedown led by the FBI, the other intelligence agencies and other law enforcement agencies to disrupt command and control infrastructure on Russian-based ransomware threat actors. And thirdly, it really talks a lot about international engagement, not only on capacity building, but how do we disrupt and deter cyber activity. But it's really on the critical infrastructure side of things that I think for the chamber, for our members, and for this community in particular, that there will be a significant amount of forward-looking effort. So the administration has talked a lot about security measures and regulations, and it's done that both through certain sector-specific efforts, and we can get into this in the next round of question, whether that's focused on the electricity sector, increasing visibility in operational technology environments and policy around that. It has talked at length about enhancing the security requirements across the transportation sector, and we'll broadly call this not only airports and railways, but also the distribution of oil and natural gas to the nation's pipelines. And most recently, it's articulated a perspective on how local water authorities should enhance cyber audits on an annual basis as part of annual review. So there's the security measures side of the National Cyber Strategy. That's one piece of the market. A second piece of the National Cyber Strategy, we'll talk about harmonization. And this certainly will have applications for the defense community. It will have applications for critical infrastructure that are already subject to layers of certain cyber-specific regulation, but the administration has a view that harmonization, that complying once and then attesting that, whether that's at one agency or another time, needs significant improvement. And then the third pretty significant piece, not only of the National Cyber Strategy, but of the broader administration's work, is on incident reporting. And we can get into this a little bit in the discussion, but following SolarWinds, following the Colonial Pipeline and Kaseya and JBS Foods, there was a very significant legislative push on creating a common, harmonized requirement for critical infrastructure owners and operators to report serious and significant cyber incidents to government bodies. So those are the three probably biggest subsets of the National Cyber Strategy. One, increasing security measures for critical infrastructure. Two, harmonizing where applicable. And three, increasing or establishing a common cyber incident reporting scheme for critical infrastructure. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. And one thing that you said that really hit home for me is we're not doing enough as a country to protect critical infrastructure. And it made me think of all of the companies in Utah that are contracting with the DoD, or they might hold an enormous amount of personally identifiable information, or they might be involved in people's livelihood, like the banking sector or the housing or real estate sector, things that are really, really critical to how our country can be resilient through cyber attacks. And Spencer, you work with a lot of these types of companies. So what are the biggest challenges they're facing right now in terms of being resilient on their cyber strategy?
Fantastic question, Robert, and just an honor to be with you guys. Vince, I really respect you and what the U.S. Chamber is doing in Washington. To me, you guys are the premier organization in our nation's capital, advocating for small businesses and being a voice for us out there. And of course, UATA, everything that you're doing across the state is fantastic as well. So thank you so much for that leadership. In regards to the problem, the issues that we face most often with small businesses across the state and across the country that we deal with from an IT perspective in cybersecurity is that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink is often an issue that we have. You mentioned earlier, we are the IT department for about 500 businesses, and so many, I would say less than 5 or 10% are really following at least 95% or more of our recommendations that we've put forth to them from a cybersecurity perspective. And what we see so often is that until a business actually experiences a breach, they don't realize the importance of cybersecurity. And if I could suggest one thing for a business owner or a business leader that might be on today's call is just to say, hey, cybersecurity is just as important as hiring the right employees and training the right employees and, putting effort towards our R&D. Cybersecurity should be just as big a priority as anything else in your business, the financial health of your business, because cybersecurity can deteriorate your company's image. It can deteriorate your company's ability to be successful and deliver products if you're not paying attention to it. Vincent, you mentioned a couple things. You talked about attesting to certain requirements and things of that nature. I'm a big proponent of moving from attest over to certify. And what we see so often today is that, maybe a defense subcontractor, they get something from their prime that says, hey, we need you to check these boxes and promise that you're doing all these things from a cybersecurity perspective. Or sometimes it's an insurance provider saying, hey, we need you to sign off that you are doing all these things from a cybersecurity perspective. And, a business owner, a chief operations officer, they look at it and say, yeah, I think we're doing these things. We can attest to those. And when they check those boxes, they sign off and they send it back to their prime. They send it up to their insurance provider. What I would love to see is that we move to a certification stance across the industry, particularly where we're trying to protect our nation's secrets. And instead of just saying, hey, business owner, please sign off on this, let's bring in a third party and that can actually take a look at what we're doing and certify that we're following those requirements. And another thing you mentioned, Vince, that I think has been fantastic. Across the nation, it would be great to get uniform reporting requirements when there's a breach or an incident that takes place. I know here in the state of Utah, we have a state law that requires businesses to provide some reporting to those who are impacted when there's been a breach or an incident, but it'd be great to get more uniform there. So just in kind of closing out that question, Robert, please, business leaders, start taking cybersecurity just as important as everything else in your business, your financial metrics, your manufacturing outputs, your human resource related issues. Cybersecurity is just as important as all of those, and please engage an outside third party, put you through a gap assessment to see where you might be falling short, and then provide you with a roadmap on getting cyber compliant.
Vincent and Spencer, along those lines, what kind of breaches are we talking about here? So for an aerospace, defense, or security company, a company that's working on sensitive stuff, what is a possible scenario, or what are some examples of some incidents that they should be worried about, and that can help them kind of paint a picture of why they should invest so much in cyber?
Yeah, please go first.
You want to start? So, I mean, certainly ransomware is still kind of the topic du jour in terms of policymakers. And I think Spencer, highlighted that well, that, policymakers increasingly are not interested in hearing from organizations that are just doing the cyber basics or just doing cyber hygiene. That is no longer really acceptable, especially if you own, operate, manage any part of critical infrastructure. That we increasingly are going out and saying, like, we need to do standards-based attestation, certification, third-party assessments against information security standards, whether that's NIST 800-171, the framework 853, ISO, depending on like your level of an organization. Those sorts of standards-based compliance work will really go a long way in terms of meeting regulators and policymakers' expectations that you're taking cybersecurity seriously and are investing adequate resources and reducing the cyber risk. Certainly ransomware, top of the list. I think especially for those that operate in the DIP environment, economic espionage, trade secret theft, any sort of Chinese-based campaigns that are looking for the nation's secrets, certainly are probably the next most probably class of incidents that we're interested in. The last group of incidents that I think is a particular interest to policymakers, or two more. One, attacks on operational technologies. Like we're increasingly seeing in policies globally, perspectives on OT environments distinct and separate from enterprise risk management, which is core IT. Attacks on the OT certainly were highlighted in Colonial. Certainly were a focus of the administration's 100-day electric sector sprint to increase visibility in those endpoints. The TSA's Cybersecurity Directive #2, following Colonial, really puts a fine point on what security measures, whether that's patching, vulnerability, upgradability of OT. OT is the other kind of attack vector that I think folks are starting to orient a good bit of time around. And then supply chain attacks. There's just software supply chain, certainly SolarWinds, certainly Log4j, vulnerability exploit, continuing through the 3CUX exploit earlier this year. I think it really highlights the class of incidents that policymakers here in DC and around the globe are focusing on. So Spencer, over to you.
Yeah, you really talked about some incidents that have hit national news there, Vince. A few, just to take a little bit closer to home here in Utah, a few that have happened that we've been dealing with in recent weeks here at Wasatch IT. I'm obviously not going to name any names, but hey, we have one customer that came to us, and it just so turns out that they decided as an organization that multi-factor authentication was important for most of their employees. But hey, key executives, that's a little bit too much of a pain in the butt for them to actually approve on their cell phone, or they want to log into their computer or to their Microsoft 365 account. And sure enough, a tricky little phishing email came into a key executive's email inbox. That executive clicked on something. It took them to a spoofed or fake web page. They input their Microsoft 365 credentials, and boom, the hackers are in the network. The hackers have access to sensitive information inside that organization, and we've got to go in and clean that up. So there's an example of a phishing attack that just took place very recently with one of our customers who just decided that the multi-factor authentication wasn't important for all users. And another couple of examples, going back to kind of ransomware that Vince mentioned. We had another company fairly recently who was with one of our competitors, and the competitor wasn't making sure that the firewall was patched. And so sure enough, and I'm sure that best intention, they just got too busy. They didn't have the proper procedures in place to ensure that those firewalls are getting patched. And the bad guys are able to get through that firewall, gain access to the network, infect the entire network with ransomware, and force that organization to pay several $100,000 in ransom just to get access to their data again. Another local example was through a SQL injection. As Microsoft SQL Server was not getting patched by the internal IT team like they promised. And of course, ransomware comes through that hole in the network, and we get called in later to clean that up and to secure that customer and help them move forward. So these are local companies that along the Wasatch front that very recently have gone through these particular incidents. And the executives, they put a lot of trust into the people that they were relying on to secure their IT, but verification is also an important thing. If you're a CEO, a COO, a CFO, you need to be making sure that you're receiving regular reports from your IT team saying, here are our procedures that we have in place for patching. Here's the procedures that we have in place for training all of your employees. That the executives, the accountants, everybody in your organization should be trained regarding cybersecurity as well. And they should be bringing forth regular recommendations at least every 6 months or so on saying, hey, we need to replace this antiquated system, et cetera.
Excellent. That really helps paint the picture. So thank you for those individual stories, Spencer. And for those, I think it was 5 core areas, Vince, that you're thinking at the national level: ransomware, economic espionage, attacks on OT, and supply chain attacks. Super interesting, and definitely something that we should all keep an eye on. I want to move to CMMC requirements. So CMMC stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and it's important for DoD contractors, especially, and companies working with government contractors. Vince, can you tell us what this is and why it's important? And then Spencer, I'd love to hear, any thoughts you have on how companies in Utah should be thinking about this.
Sure. So taking a step back and looking at the kind of the policy objective for what the department is trying to achieve through CMMC or similar supply chain programs. This CMMC has born out of a policy priority from Katie Arrington, former Trump administration DoD official, who wanted to establish and enhance the department's supply chain robustness, really looking at uneven levels of cybersecurity across the department's hundreds of thousands of suppliers. And that's everything from critical suppliers to small and mid-sized business suppliers. So CMMC was established as a 5 certification level program, depending on your risk, depending on your services provided to the department, depending on your vendor relationship with a prime, would kind of require you to perform a certification at a certain level. Enter the Biden administration, and the policy objective really changed, because what they had heard from businesses large and small, was that CMMC was too timely, costive, bureaucratic, inflexible, too hard to achieve the security requirements relative to the outcomes. So the Biden administration has thoroughly put the CMMC program under review, consolidated 5 into 3 different certification levels. And that's where things are right now. They are still, the Biden administration is still in a review period for CMMC. They need to publish the updated program for notice and comment, to receive feedback on if this new program will both be more achievable and more doable for businesses. But I think that the objective is not measurably changed. Yes, simplicity. Yes, still core aligned to NIST 800 to 171 in terms of core requirements. But this is certainly taking a lot longer. But the industry really should, I think, keep in mind that this is a program that will come into effect, whether it's mid-year 23, into year 23, or early 24. Within this administration's time horizon, CMMC will be a contract requirement for DoD contractors.
Thanks, Vince. Over to you, Spencer. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, wonderful timeline presentation there, Vince. I think that really summarizes things well. When CMMC was first released, I was so excited about the future that we could have with really helping all of our defense industrial base, prime subcontractors, and making sure that we're providing adequate cybersecurity to protect our nation's secrets. And it's kind of slowly kind of gotten watered down. People saying it's been a little too difficult, and there's been a lot of talk about moving from, okay, well, the certifying isn't that important. Let's just do some tougher testing and stuff like that. But the longer it takes, and it feels like the momentum continues to slow down on CMMC, the worse it is for our country and our organization. Russia and China and all of our enemies out there, they're not slowing down and trying to get into our subs and our primes and trying to get access to that information. So the quicker we can get these recommendations and these guidelines out there, the better off we're going to be. And I just encourage the administration to ensure that there's as much certification as possible out there to make sure that we're indeed taking cybersecurity seriously across the defense industrial base.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I was at an event earlier this week, and Katie Arrington spoke, an event hosted by one of our member companies. And she is the godmother, is what she calls herself, of the CMMC program. And one interesting anecdote she shared is that the CCP, China has 100 cyber professionals for every one cyber professional we have in the US, which highlights, how significant that threat is and how seriously we need to take requirements like CMMC. Vince, what other federal requirements should companies be aware of besides the CMMC?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about CERCIA and incident reporting requirements. Talk a little bit about the NIST framework update and potentially the vector that it's going to take on supply chain issues. And then I'll maybe mention the SEC's public disclosure and cyber risk management rules. And there's certainly subsector rules as well. I mentioned TSA's cybersecurity directives for pipelines and the nation's transportation systems. But CERCIA stands for the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, now law, signed by President Biden in March of 22, requires CISA to promulgate rules within 2 years, draft rules within 2 years, to define, one, covered cybersecurity, covered critical infrastructure, and two, to cover serious and significant cyber incidents that must be reported to CISA or another federal agency as CISA deems appropriate within 72 hours. So these are attacks that will interrupt either an essential service, serious attacks that interrupt an essential service, serious attacks that might target operational technology, or ransomware attacks. And all of those have to be reported to CISA within 72 hours. CISA is still working on, and that's the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS. CISA is still working on those rules. They have until next March to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking. But that's number one, there's incident reporting requirements, and then there's harmonization work. If you have already DFARS requirements that require a report to DC3 under a particular DoD contract requirement, then harmonizing those to CERCIA is important. The second type of regulatory work that's happening it relates to the National Institute of Standards and Technology's cybersecurity framework for critical infrastructure. NIST has undergone an activity to develop an update 2.0 to the framework. And the important thing to highlight here is that it adds a new governance function to the original 5 function areas: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So there'll be a new corporate governance section. And there's some discussions around adding supply chain as a 7th function to that framework update. NIST is very much of an open perspective on this. They want to hear from industry. For those that are interested in filing covenants, NIST.gov/cyber framework will get you where you need to go in terms of being able to take a look at the core framework 2.0 discussion draft, which is out. Third and finally, the Securities and Exchange Commission has published a notice of proposed rulemaking for for publicly traded companies to do 3 things. One, to participate to add a 96-hour requirement to filing 8K reports on material cyber incidents to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Publicly, you've established materiality within 96 hours, you've got to file an 8K to the SEC. We're really concerned with this because it could be an unmitigated and ongoing that could be an unmitigated vulnerability that is still an active exploit without a patch. And just publishing this information publicly, we have some concerns with. The second thing it requires is certain attestations by a publicly traded company on their cyber expertise on their board and in their front office. So what capabilities, what certifications does a CISO have if you have one? That has to be made publicly. And the third thing it will require is more detailed information on what cyber risk management programs an organization has.
Thanks, Vince. So if I understand correctly, there will be cyber incident reporting requirements, but they're not currently in place. But CISA will be doing there will be a rulemaking on that soon, and CISOs and CEOs will need to report certain incidents like a ransomware attack in the future. Is that right? Yep, great. Spencer, on a tactical level, could you talk to us? Many times our companies at UATA, they need to collaborate quite a bit with other companies. It's not a verticalized supply chain for them, for example. So how can they balance the need to keep their information secure while also being able to collaborate effectively, move quickly as a business, respond effectively to government contracts, which often come and go very quickly. They have to be very nimble. How can you balance information sharing with privacy and security?
Yeah, and cybersecurity doesn't always need to mean a reduction in productivity, to be quite honest. I guess change management is a big piece of this. So, and sometimes it's just changing and managing the mindset of your staff, your employees when it comes to cybersecurity. There's always that resistance to, oh my goodness, I don't want to have to use multi-factor authentication when I log in. I haven't had to the past 10 years. I haven't had any issues. Why do I have to do it now? And just managing that mindset, not letting those laggards slow you down from progressing when it comes to a cybersecurity standpoint is a big key, I think, in moving forward. And just bring in an expert that's going to help you perform a gap assessment and say, hey, here's the things that you need to put in place internally. Here's the technologies you need to put in place. Here's the policy and procedure you need to put in place. And here's the training you need to put in place for your staff to maintain good cybersecurity hygiene and to be compliant with CMMC and these other standards that are coming down the pike. And externally, it's really important to have a conversation with your vendors, your suppliers, and those in your supply chain to say, hey, if we're going to be collaborating with you, if we're going to be sharing company information with you, vendor information with you, let's have a serious discussion about what you guys are doing from a cybersecurity standpoint as well. Vince, you mentioned for Fortune 500 companies and those organizations, you talked about having somebody that at the CISO level or somebody on the board that has really a good, solid expertise when it comes to cybersecurity. And if you're a small or medium-sized business, that might be a little bit tougher. But bring in an expert partner from the outside that can be that partner and sit at the table with you and have those serious discussions. Whenever you're talking about a big business change, it's probably going to involve technology. And whenever you're talking technology, you should have a cybersecurity discussion at the exact same time, because those two things always go hand in hand.
Great. We do have one question here, and Vince, if you want to take a crack at this. The question is, can you comment on how cyber requirements such as CMMC and encryption requirements will be integrated into future DoD requirements? Will CMMC be applied to COTS hardware, software, while encryption be more related to developed embedded systems? If you have any thoughts on that, would love to hear them.
Not sure I have a good answer to the question, but I think that generally use of encryption ubiquitously, like use of multi-factor authentication ubiquitously, is a part of the department's long-term, even probably short-term priorities. As we're looking toward, as the department's executing on its zero trust strategy, use of encryption is going to be is number one. Just like, and whether that's for data arrest, data and transmission, use of encryption is going to be a top priority, and we'll seek to source products and services from commercial providers that can provide fidelity on encryption. Separate and somewhat related is the government's work on establishing post-quantum cryptography algorithms that are resistant to future quantum cyber attacks. So I think that there's a body of work that NIST is undergoing on those PQC algorithms. They selected 4 of them. I think 2 of them immediately failed. But there is some like post-quantum work leveraging the next generation of cryptographic standards for security. But I think in the short term, look for DoD certainly to promulgate rules on using encryption.
Good to know what might be coming down the pipeline here in terms of requirements. We're wrapping up in the next 9 minutes, so I'd like to hear from both of you. Maybe Spencer, if you can take a crack at this first. AI and machine learning is all over the news. It's affecting every corner of our economy, and the corners that hasn't affected yet, I'm sure that's coming soon. So how does this affect cyber defense for companies? How should they be thinking about that? And then any other emerging trends that you're seeing that are kind of on the horizon? They may not need to be implemented today, but anything else that's coming up that we should just kind of keep top of mind for the future. So love to hear, AI, machine learning, and emerging trends from Spencer, and then also from Vince.
And AI is definitely going to be changing our world in every way, inside and outside of cybersecurity moving forward. What I am most scared about is not how we're going to use it to help defend, but how our enemies are using it and will be using it to create new and better attacks. We talked about, Robert, you mentioned, for every one cybersecurity professional, we have 100 over there in China that we're trying to fight. And imagine every one of those 100 using AI to just multiply the vastness of their attacks as they're trying to get into the networks that we're trying to secure. So that's certainly something that's very scary to me as we look at AI. And other trends that we look at as far as cybersecurity and for our government and defense contractors out there, it's really just pay close attention to the news as it relates to CMMC and how that's going to impact your business, and start budgeting for that, because that's going to be an expense that you're going to want to invest in as those rules and regulations start making an impact.
Yeah, just to build off of that, I think that artificial intelligence has been here. We are using AI to help with our human capital problem, automating cyber defense, to identify known vulnerabilities and deploy mitigation technologies. I think there's an interesting story I heard a couple of weeks ago from Hugh Carroll, who is one of the organizers for the RSA conference. When they closed the call to speakers for RSA, and the world's largest cyber conference, there were 0 sessions submitted on artificial intelligence. Boom, ChatGPT explodes in front page news in February, and by the time that the RSA came around in April, almost 70% of sessions touched on artificial intelligence in some way, shape, or form. I think the world has awoken to what generative AI can do in terms of simplifying business processes and common everyday tasks. But I think that there is generally a good bit of work for the for tech companies to do in telling the story on artificial intelligence. AI is one of the core pillars of the Department of Defense's Zero Trust framework. It's a part of NIST and CISA's framework. Being able to identify, automatically secure devices, secure access can only be done through automated technologies, and we shouldn't be. We should be appropriately concerned with it, but I think we should also embrace it as a tool that is really going to help manage a business and operational and enterprise risk in a way that will reduce human workflows.
Thanks, Vince, and thanks so much, Spencer. This has been a really enlightening conversation. One more final question for either one of you. Where are we in terms of our cyber capability as a nation, and where do we need to be? Compare us to Russia, China, and other geopolitical competitors, if you can. Where are we now, and where do we really need to be?
I'm happy to start there. Offering a reflection on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's really interesting to see kind of the disconnected and disjointed battle plan that Russia executed on pre-invasion, almost the uncoordinated military activity with the cyber capabilities of SVR, FSB, and others. Certainly, there were some wiper attacks. There were a few attacks on critical infrastructure. But the Russian battle plan, on February 24th, 22, wasn't, built on offensive cyber capabilities. I think there was generally an assumption that the military would be able to invade to Kyiv and the battle would be over in fairly short order. U.S. cyber capabilities, by contrast, certainly are much more unified. I think there is a unity of command, a unity of purpose in terms of offensive capabilities. We've seen some of that to the effect of risk and consequence deterrence operations executed over the last year or so. Most publicly with Hive and the disruption of Russian command and control, ransomware infrastructure. We probably have a ways to go in terms of national resilience and just the security of the American business community, and candidly even of U.S. government infrastructure, and whether that's U.S. federal government infrastructure, state and local, municipal. We've got a ways to go, but it's certainly a maturation and a development that is accelerated in recent years. I mean, we've gotten beyond just talking about the framework for the NIST framework as a core IT or core enterprise IT requirement. We're talking about software, we're talking about cloud, we're talking about operational technology environments, we're talking more about certification these days. So I think US cyber capability is certainly improved. The Biden-Harris administration has thrown a lot of money at it. I mean, more so than others. But if you just take CISA's annual appropriations as just a point of reflection, they're a $4.1 billion cyber defense agency. JP Morgan spends $750 million annually on cyber. Bank of America spends half a billion on cyber. America's corporations are investing a lot in cyber, but at a national level, and we're certainly not investing probably enough yet.
Great thoughts. Thank you. Spencer, anything to add to that?
Yeah, taking that down to the small and medium-sized businesses, we have a long ways to go when it comes to reaching full cybersecurity maturity. And I think there's real opportunity, though. It's scary to think about how far we have to go, but I think there's real opportunity. If you are a business leader and you want your organization to be best in class, if you really want to stand out with your prime contractors and stand out amongst all of your competitors out there and whatever you're manufacturing or whatever you're delivering to the public, you should be investing in cybersecurity. Vince, you talked about how much Bank of America and JP Morgan and all these other organizations are investing in cybersecurity. If you want to be a market leader as a small and or mid-sized business, investing in cybersecurity is one way to really stand out. And in marketing that to your customers and marketing that to your prime contractors is one way that you can make sure that you're gaining that revenue, that you're winning those deals moving forward.
Thanks, Spencer. And thanks, Vince Voce, U.S. Chamber, Spencer Ferguson from Wasatch IT. We really appreciate your time today. And thanks, everybody, for joining. And a great question that we had in the middle there. And look forward to seeing everybody on the next webinar.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all.